Okay.
Okay, right. Let's commit here and now. We're calling this podcast "This Spooky Dance."
I like it.
We're just gonna commit now.
Yeah.
We figured it
Yeah.
out like a second before recording, and because I'm really bad at naming stuff, I will like I will always want to like rebrand or something like that. Even like my my main YouTube channel, Raggedy Cat Productions. Like it took a long time before I finally settled on going with Raggedy Cat Productions, and that is what it's going to be called for the end of time, and that's what my actual film productions will be listed as
Yeah.
Raggedy Cat Productions.
One might interpret that as a fear of commitment.
Yeah, one might.
Well,
Correctly.
if you look at how many times I've changed from stand in stand to get good Gabriel and back
Yeah.
again, and now I'm back to get good Gabriel again, it's yeah, I have the same problem.
Welcome to This Spooky Dance. If you're looking for a professional podcast about myth, monsters, legends, disappearances, and other creepy shit, I'll be real. This might not be for you. These few seconds you've been listening to now might have been a waste of your time. Uh, okay, I'm Andrew.
I'm Gabriel, and yeah, absolutely. If you want to hear two guys sitting in their house talking about what they think of things that we've researched on the internet about creepy stuff that we just kind of get excited about, then yeah, you absolutely are in the right place. And yes, the spooky dance. And today we're going to be talking about the Yeti. And in this spooky dance, I'm going to let Andrew lead because I don't know shit about Yetis, and Andrew's researched this extensively. So yeah.
Okay, so setting me up for failure already with already.
It's all on you now. I got my coffee. I'm sitting back.
Okay, so some of this is actually going to be reworked from an episode of The Limey and the Yank, which is another show that we've done before. We had some unused stuff where we're going to be talking about the swamp ape. If you notice like a sudden weird audio change, that's because it's from an old recording, but the Florida skunk ape stuff, I was not willing to re-record it because we'd lose the genuine reactions from that. So I went to Disney World, and Disney World has got this ride called Expedition Everest, which is about an expedition to the Everest. The Everest. The expedition to the Everest.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, Expedition Everest. They went up the mountain, and then like a Yeti tries to knock your roller coaster out. And the ride's queue line has all of these different like artifacts and different pictures of the Yeti and all like quite traditional stuff. And I thought this is really interesting because it has a very good air of authenticity, like they're actually artifacts. But like from here, this whole sort of thing where I started getting really interested in Bigfoot. Full disclosure for anyone listening now who's wondering my position, no, I do not believe in Bigfoot, although I kind of hope he's out there. I hope that I'm wrong, and that would be nice to have like just like that little mystery be proved true. I don't think he is real, but like it'd be nice. I don't know where you are with it, Gabriel.
You know what? I have never so these sort of mythical creatures and monsters and things like that were super popular in the 80s when I was a little kid, when you had shows like Unsolved Mysteries and all that kind of stuff. So in the history of my looking into mysteries and spooky shit, animals were like the most boring to me, I'm sorry to say. So like Bigfoot, it's like even if we discovered that there was some creature that fit this description and we gave it a name, we would just have discovered a new animal. Like there's nothing particularly mysterious or supernatural about. And that's the thing, I never understood the association between like Yeti and Bigfoot with the supernatural, and having just this be some animal divorced of the supernatural is kind of boring. It kind of makes it a little bit mundane for me.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of something that we're going to get into here, because when I was researching Bigfoot, one of the things that I kept getting brought up with was the Yeti, where Bigfoot enthusiasts love to talk about the Yeti as being either a cousin or the same species as the Sasquatch. So I started to look into it. And what I think I can most charitably say is if Bigfoot and the Yeti both exist, it would be reasonable to assume that they're the same species. But the Yetis have got absolutely nothing to do with Bigfoot at all. Um, it's
Well, that remains a little unclear for me. How would they be the same species if they come from two different? Well, I suppose they could. I suppose the Sasquatch could be um sort of a racial offshoot of the Yeti. I get, but why are we saying that? Just because they're both big, like, forest monsters?
well, they're described sometimes, and I do mean sometimes because it's actually very sketchy with the Yeti. But they're often both
Yeah.
described as being large, kind of ape-like men, and the idea that they are the same species and that they have spread out, I think is fairly reasonable, seeing as grizzly bears live in both North America and Asia. And
Okay, that's fair. Yeah,
yeah, brown bears
I
live in
get
both,
that.
and brown bears are going to be coming up a lot in this video. Um, uh, like obviously,
So it would be like maybe I'm sorry. So it would be like a brown bear, polar bear kind of thing. Like they're both
well,
bears. They're just
yeah, well, even more so than that. Like, say, grizzly bears live in North America, Kodiak bears live in Canada, Himalayan brown bears
yeah,
live on Mount Everest,
yeah.
interestingly, but they are all types of specifically brown bear, so even more closely related than like a grizzly and a polar bear. Um,
Okay, okay.
so, like, in terms of distribution, it's completely reasonable that they would. But a lot of people say, do you ever notice that Bigfoot and Yeti are always sighted in areas where there are bears? And I used to say this, but I'm starting to think that's a little bit unfair because bears live on most of the planet.
Yeah,
There aren't many places in the world where bears haven't set up and gone, this'll do us, we'll live here.
yeah. That's true.
So, the Yeti. So I'm going to take you basically back to the beginning on this. Um,
Sure.
so, Yeti have been an aspect of Himalayan Tibetan folklore for a long ass time. But as far as we know of them, we have this really frustrating thing where kind of no one actually gives a shit about them. So, a guy called Brian Hodgson in the 1800s wrote all about the different mammals in the region of Nepal, and he
Mm.
said that they weren't able to find monkeys in this certain area, but at one point they shot at what they reported to be a large humanoid creature covered in hair. But this was just like
Yes.
one note in a book. But then in 1899, this fella called Lawrence Waddell, he published his book Among the Himalayas, which is about his time in the Himalayas. And he
Mm.
wrote, some large footprints in the snow led across our track and away up to the higher peaks. These were alleged to be the trail of the hairy wild men who were believed to live amongst the eternal snow, along with the mythical white lions whose roar is reputed to be heard during storms. The belief in these creatures is universal among the Tibetans. None, however, of the many Tibetans I have interrogated on this subject could ever give me an authentic case. On the most superficial investigation, it is always resolved into something that somebody heard tell of. These so-called hairy wild men are evidently the great yellow snow bear. By the way, when I looked up great yellow snow bear, I looked in Ursus isabellinus, which is the scientific name, and he's referring to the Himalayan brown bear, but it was an old name,
Okay.
which is highly carnivorous, not true, and often kills yaks. Yet, although most of the Tibetans know this bear sufficiently enough to give it a wide berth, they live in such an atmosphere of superstition that they are always ready to find extraordinary and supernatural explanations for uncommon events.
Hmm.
And that is the only reference to Yetis in the entire damn book.
Wow.
It's
That's
hundreds
it,
of
huh?
pages. That's it.
Well, I just thought it was interesting that he was sort of acknowledging that most of this that the people that he talked to admitted that these were myths or that these were like secondhand accounts that they had been told by other people. I found that a little bit interesting.
like what's interesting. This is why this has actually been really hard to research. Um, in fact, if you're someone who has done a lot of research into Yetis, or even a little bit of it, you're probably actually going to come across the exact same things I did, because there's not much else there. In 1921, Colonel Charles Howard Bury led the British Mount Everest reconnaissance expedition, and the idea of this was to see if it was possible to get to the vicinity of Mount Everest, and if it was possible, would they be able to get up to the top. On the journey, he came across these footprints, and he wrote in his book, "They followed long and at times steep climb over soft powdery snow to the top of the pass. Even at these heights we came across tracks in snow. We were able to pick out tracks of hares and foxes, but one that at first looked like a human foot puzzled us considerably. Our coolies at once jumped to the conclusion that this must be the wild man of the snows, to which they gave the name Metokangmi, the abominable snowman, who interested the newspapers so much. On my return to civilized countries, I read with interest delightful accounts of the ways and customs of this wild man whom we were supposed to have met. These tracks, which caused so much comment, were probably caused by a large loping grey wolf, which in the soft snow formed double tracks, rather like those of a barefooted man. In Tibet he takes the form of a hairy man who lives in the snows, and little Tibetan children who are naughty and disobedient are frightened by the wonderful fairy tales that are told about him. To escape from him they must run down the hill. Many other such tales have they with which to strike terror into the hearts of bad boys and girls."
Interesting.
So I looked into the 1921 expedition, and they took photos of a lot of what they saw along the way. They did not take photographs of these footprints.
Really?
Yeah. And that...
Oh, that's odd.
Yeah, and that and the way... that and the way he speaks about it, the way that Howard Bury talks about in his book, really indicates to me that he didn't think it was anything.
Yeah.
He didn't think
it sounds
was a
like
big
he
deal.
didn't think that it was anything.
It doesn't sound like either of them thought anything of it, and that's what's really interesting, is all of these turn of the century explorers who people cite as like, well, they saw these footprints and they said this. It's like, they didn't take it seriously. They kind of just thought it's probably a bear or probably a wolf or something like that. Yeah, I'd say actually they were quite dismissive of the local folklore as just that, folklore.
And I think that's really interesting, because they weren't part of that folklore. They weren't that folklore wasn't instantiated in them the way that it would have been with a local explorer who probably would have attributed it to. I also think it's interesting that when he said it was probably, and then he went on to say like what the most likely thing that could have made tracks like that we know of would have been, without actually knowing whether or not it was that creature. That's interesting to me.
Yeah, it's very because it's like there is a photograph that exists, and we're going to come to that photograph shortly. There is a photograph that exists of a proposed Yeti track taken in the Himalayas, and weirdly I see it attributed to this 1921 expedition a lot, and it isn't. It is not from it. They didn't. Yeah, people are like, here's the 1920s one. It's not. It's from the 1950s. It was a reconnaissance mission across Everest, but it's not this one. Whatever it was that they saw, they clearly didn't think it was important enough to take a photograph of it. Like,
I'm recalling something from on a completely different topic that I think sort of applies to that thought process that we just heard about. The guy saying, well, the people think it's this, but they all give me secondhand accounts, so it was probably this other thing. There is a lot of there's a lot of talk about the Apostle Paul.
Okay.
In Christianity, where he had that moment on the road to Damascus where he all of a sudden believed, he thought he had seen the risen Jesus, and he started preaching for Christianity and stopped persecuting them. And then Peter having had being sort of the father of early Christian teaching after Jesus died, and going out and becoming this really zealous preacher of the Christian message and all that. The secular the way that secularists, not secularists, but atheists account for those two things is usually they had a post bereavement, or Peter had a post bereavement psychotic break or something, and then Paul, when he had his big conversion on the road to Damascus, he had this psychotic everybody's having these flip out psychotic breakdowns or something, and the one might ask, well, what evidence is there that they had that everybody was having these massive hallucinations and psychotic breakdowns and everything, and that didn't seem to be that common in those times anyway. And the answer that they'll always give is, well, that's the more reasonable explanation, and the reason it's the more reasonable explanation is simply that it doesn't include the supernatural. So it's kind of an assumption, and I kind of like the fact that this guy was dismissive in exactly the same way. Well, it must have been this other thing. We don't have any evidence that it is this other thing, but it's not the Yeti, so...
I think that the more reasonable explanation, say, with that case, is like, rather than psychotic breaks and stuff like that, to me the most logical explanation is it just didn't happen. It was a story that was made up. Like, I always find it weird when people go... Like, because I find people go, like, really weird directions to try and justify the existence of, say, like Bigfoot and things like that, because obviously you know of the giant great ape Gigantopithecus, right? The big hoss of an orangutan that got to like 10 foot tall.
I actually don't.
I'm going to send you a picture because you're going to think it's great.
Okay.
But so people often use Gigantopithecus as a way of justifying the existence of like a Bigfoot or a Yeti or something like that. And they're like, maybe it's Gigantopithecus. And it's like, okay, so is it really a more reasonable explanation that it is this animal that has been extinct for over 100,000 years that did not live in North America, nor did it live in the Himalayas? I don't know if that's actually a good example. Like, what that does tell us is that apes can indeed get that big. And sure, they can. But the idea that people will throw out there saying, well, maybe it's a Gigantopithecus, and that's what people are seeing. I was like, I kind of think it's way more likely to be a bear.
You know, and that's actually a problem with people who do try and justify beliefs as opposed to things that they know. Is when maybe it was a Gigantopithecus. I don't think they mean that. I think what they mean is that based on the fact that Gigantopithecus existed, it's reasonable to think exactly what you said. It's reasonable to think that a large ape could live in the Americas or in the Himalayas. That's what I think they're really saying. They're just not articulating it properly. It's just like in the examples of Christianity that I gave, what the arguments for the resurrection and all that type of stuff, that the furthest that people can go is that it's reasonable to think that somebody was buried in a tomb and then the tomb was empty later. Really is what it ultimately boils down to.
Sure.
But yeah, it's absolutely. I mean, if Gigantopithecus, again, all I can say is that's then it stands to reason that an ape that large could exist. You know.
Sorry, is someone mowing the grass?
Fucking leaf blowers. I'm sorry, we're gonna have to pause for a minute. It's
no problem.
Fucking war zone out there. God damn it. Oh God.
So we just took a brief break and now we're back. So one of the things with the Yeti that I keep seeing is that the people who talk about the Yeti online today tend to be talking about Bigfoot, and they like casually mention the Yeti, and they're like, oh yeah, the Yeti, like that's like the Asian Bigfoot. And what's interesting is when you actually get into the Yeti folklore, they're really kind of not. So there's a few different types. So the Metokangmi, as it was mentioned, the abominable snowman, that is the term that was used by the Sherpa people. But the Yeti in folklore is really different from what you describe as Bigfoot. You have several versions. The first is the Zute, which is said to be about 8 feet tall, and even though it is 8 feet tall, it prefers to walk on 4 legs and hunts livestock. Now, incidentally, the Zute is also literally the same name they use for the Himalayan brown bear. And then there's the Chute, who is this just this little dude, this little, like a little Bigfoot. You know, I shouldn't be calling him Bigfoot.
The littlest Bigfoot.
Yeah, just this the little dude who runs about the forest and does his thing. And then there is the Mete, which is where Yeti comes from, and that roughly means cliff bear. And of course, Yeti became Yeti. These constant references to bears are really interesting, because when you look at cultural art of the Yeti, you see everything from like ape-like men to flat-out monsters to like actually just drawings of bears. And the reason the bear thing comes up so often, and this is also kind of why I think that a lot of this might actually be folklore attributed to bears, in the same way that kitsune are like what we like the Japanese attribute to foxes, is that in Tibetan folklore the bear shares a common ancestor with humans because they both stand up on their back legs. This is obviously nonsense, but this is the folk belief that, well, a long time ago they shared ancestry with us, and like we came from the same place. So the idea of like the man bear is not it makes more sense within that folklore and within that ancient culture, because those ideas like entwined men and bears. And this is also kind of why I think they're probably not talking about a Sasquatch. They are probably talking about bears.
Yeah. Which is interesting because when you put it like that, I think it's interesting that they tended to associate bears with being human-like when we typically associate like apes with being.
They did associate apes as well. Apes, bears, humans, and another creature, but I can't remember what that last one was. But yeah, it's and the folklore around them is where we get into some more like famous Yeti examples of like physical evidence. For them, it's more a point of mythology and myth and legends than it is cryptozoology. Like the Buddhist monk Lama Sangwa Dorje, which is probably not how it's pronounced, but I have winged it.
Sure.
So this was a Buddhist monk who lived out in the mountains as a hermit, and while he was out in the mountains, he becomes friends with the Yetis, and the Yetis bring him food and water, and they look after him while he meditates and things like that. And then when he built the temple, one of the Yetis had died, and he kept the scalp, and it was for blessings and rituals and things like that. And then later a hand gets added, and of course, though they were protected for hundreds of years, eventually bones from the hand get stolen. I think the scalp might have been stolen as well, and they are DNA tested, and of course they weren't they weren't Yetis. They weren't Yetis. I think almost with Bigfoot, it seems to be like cultural appropriation, and not in like the white man has dreadlocks kind of way, but actually like taking an aspect of a culture and like applying the sort of American folklore of Bigfoot to it, where I would say they're not really the same thing, like at all.
I tend to agree, and especially when you consider how much Hollywood like molded that story and that legend for its own purposes, especially around the time where like monsters were really popular. I would say totally unrelated.
Yeah, and of course we have Bigfoot, so we should probably talk about Bigfoot actually, seeing as we've been like referencing him a lot. The thing with Bigfoot is it's this really American thing. Bigfoot's this really American thing. It's like Bigfoot enthusiasts are your quintessential like all American guys who live in a small rural town, they go out into the woods and make calls at Bigfoot, and occasionally they get calls back, and I can't help but feel that it might be two Bigfoot hunters both going gazoo in the woods, and the other one goes, oh, that must be it, and goes gazoo back.
Yeah.
But I've always been fascinated as to how they know what the Bigfoot cry sounds like.
I mean, when you're out in the woods, you're gonna hear all kinds of shit that I don't know. And like, it's even more humorous is the fact that like these people are always like drunk and.
Don't get me wrong, the Bigfoot crowd, I'm not in any way trying to pick on them. They seem like a cool bunch. They seem like a bunch of guys who like to go out in the woods, have a drink, and look for Bigfoot. And
Yeah.
I mean, as far as things go, that's pretty harmless, and power to them. But what I think is interesting is that so many of these old Bigfoot sightings, they go back further than you'd think. There's sightings of Bigfoot from like the 1800s and things like that. But then what all really kicked it off was your girl, Patty, in the Patterson-Gimlin video, which of course, female Bigfoot kind of struts along and she looks over her shoulder at the camera like, bro, do you mind? And she keeps on and going. And I assume you've seen that video.
Oh yeah, many times.
What do you make of it?
So, what do I make of the video itself? Not much. I think it's there were various explanations given that it was a person in a costume or it was some other creature that was just those videos were so like blurry and out of focus back then that it actually helped the sort of proliferation of those ostensibly myths, because there was plausible deniability, you see, because of the photos and videos were so grainy and all that. But no, what do I make of it? Not much.
I kind of
they sold they sold a lot of books and TV shows and TV specials, and just it was a real industry back in the 80s. It was just that stuff was just everywhere.
And like it's one of these things where with the film footage and things like that, like I understand why people used to be like, well, the footage was grainy and out of focus. That makes sense because this, that, and the other reason. But now I kind of think that in a world where nearly everyone has got a HD camera on their phone, if they live in the Western world, the idea that we wouldn't have more evidence for it now that was like clear, I don't think that idea holds up. But like the real thing for me that listen, there's great videos out there that talk about Bigfoot. There's just one thing I feel like I need to talk about. If you want like a really good rundown of the pros and cons of the Patterson-Gimlin footage, I really recommend Armored Skeptic's video. He does one video where he fully like talks about why it's definitely real and how it couldn't be fake, and then he does the next video of like, okay, here's the skeptical side of it. But the thing I really want to talk about is Bigfoot's boobs.
Okay. Yeah, please do.
Okay, so Patty the Bigfoot in the film has boobs, and this has long been used as an example of why Bigfoot, like, she must be real. She must be real because most people wouldn't have thought to give Bigfoot boobs, and also that the boobs swing as she walks. And the guy who claims to have made the costume says that's not true. Bigfoot's boobs do not swing. Now, they absolutely do swing. They do. My question in relation to Bigfoot's boobs is, do you not think it's kind of weird that Roger Patterson, who shot the video, a year before he shot the video, released a book with this drawing in, and that this Bigfoot also happens to have boobs.
I have never in my life seen, noticed, or considered that famous Bigfoot thing had breasts ever.
I mean, it makes sense that it would if it was a female, you know, like female gorillas, female chimps, they have breasts. Like, it's a thing, like, I get it. But, like, what I always thought was people were so adamant about the sort of the smoking gun of this being Bigfoot's boobs, of like, yeah, it must be real. Like, you wouldn't have, who would have thought to put that in, you know? And
Yeah.
apparently, like, despite all of this, no one did a bit more of a background check into Robert Patterson with the book he wrote and the fact that that book happens to have a drawing of Bigfoot that happens to have boobs.
Yeah.
Now, I find that unusual. Now, in fairness to Roger Patterson, people always say, like, oh, isn't it a bit funny that he went out into the woods looking for Bigfoot and happened to find Bigfoot? To which my kind of point is like, well, yeah, he was looking for her. Like, I'd like to think he'd find her.
Yeah.
But like, if that he himself said that Bigfoot being real and him finding it, he said he was the worst possible man that could have come across Bigfoot because he was known as a huckster and he was known as a Bigfoot enthusiast. And, and he was like, okay, this could not have happened to a worse person, but I found Bigfoot. I always, because I went through this thing where I almost came out at the other end and was like, I think that's a real video. You know what? Like, it's the closest I've ever got. I'd always been like, no, it's not real. It's a very good costume, but it's not real. Some people are like, it's a bad monkey suit and things like that. It's like, it's not bad. It is not a bad costume. If it is in fact a costume, it's pretty good. But for a while, I was finally sort of being like, it could be real. It might be real. Chewbacca might live. And then, and then I saw that drawing in that fucking book he wrote. I was like, oh, where's the magic gone?
Well, that's the thing too, is that, like, going back to what I said at the beginning, even if we discovered that this is a real creature, we would have just discovered a new creature. Like, I don't know, there's not really anything special about finding a new animal unless you're like a scientist or something.
Well, the thing with Bigfoot is a lot of people have been like, is Bigfoot the missing link between ape and man? To which the answer would be no, there isn't a missing link between... There isn't one. We've done the DNA tests. There isn't one with apes.
No. And we evolve in groups. We don't have... Yeah.
There does not need to be a missing link because we don't need to be linked to apes. We are apes.
Well, and we don't, and our evolutionary history doesn't have jumps like that, unless you're talking about punctuated equilibrium. We don't typically have big leaps like that where there's A and then there's B and then there's C, and this happened in big jumps where, like, there has to be links, but it doesn't work like that.
Well, as well as that, it's like, so one of the things with Bigfoot that gets brought up is, like, some people think it's a hominid, which, you know, would be like us, chimpanzees, orangutans, and gorillas, where they're, you know, like the great apes, like it is a missing great ape. And then other people get a little bit closer to home, and they're like, I think this is a species of human, like, you know, Neanderthals or the hobbits. The hobbits are Homo floresiensis, which were these little cavemen dudes who are just the best. But like these little dudes, basically little caveman dudes, and they were like 4 foot tall, and they're rad. I love them, but some people like maybe it's actually a human species. And then I look at the Bigfoot and I'm like, I don't know, bro. I don't know. I think it might be a bear. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. Like I say, even if it's not, what difference would it make? Like, apart from, it's a discovery, and discoveries are cool, but
I would not like
they're
I would not like to hear that Bigfoot was discovered and then 6 weeks later discover that Bigfoot went extinct.
well, yeah, yeah. I just like I guess when I think about this and the issue of Bigfoot and Loch Ness monster and all that kind of stuff typically surrounds the paranormal. It's talked about in paranormal communities, and I've never understood that. It's like dowsing. You know, dowsing where you use the rods to find water or whatever.
Yeah.
People used to genuinely believe, it seems, that you could do that you could have this thing that would find water, and it was confined to the act of finding water. Now, or at least in the 20th century, and maybe people still do this, it's become, if you talk to certain like new age groups or whatever, they talk about it like it's a spiritual thing where they find your like spiritual energies or something and get it. Like, how did this myth about how you can find water in the desert turn into a spiritual? I don't get it. They're unrelated.
No,
And likewise with these animals, like even if Loch Ness monster was a plesiosaur and Bigfoot was a Gigantopithecus or whatever it was, okay, in the paranormal sense, so what? There's just animals.
Okay, so I got a question for you, because this is one of the dudes who shot the video, and he went really quiet for years and years because of the harassment, basically.
Yeah,
like you're a huckster, you're a fraud, and things like that. And
sure.
And I just gotta ask you a question, a serious question.
Okay.
Okay. How old do you think this dude is?
Let me see. Mid to late 50s, mid to late 50s.
Mid to late 50s. He's going grey, but still a young dude. You want to know how old this fucker is?
How old is he?
This dude is 89 years old.
Damn.
He is probably about 87 in that picture.
Wow.
He looks like gold. My God.
No shit. God, I hope for me in the future.
Yeah.
Damn. What did you say he was? 80? How old did you say? 80 what?
So he's 89 now. I'm estimating he was about 87 when that photograph was taken, because I saw it in an article that was like from 2020. Yeah. That dude is 89.
Wow.
Holy shit.
I'm 49 years away from that, and I hope I'm still rocking the cowboy shit.
Yeah, like, my God, like, you know what?
Damn. I thought Harrison Ford looked good for... Dang.
Yeah, it's like... Whew. Well done, sir.
Yeah, no.
Florida has its own Bigfoot called the Skunk Ape, and it has long been kind of a thing in Florida folklore. And if you're from Florida, you're at least aware of it as a concept. But there are these pictures that were taken, and they were mailed to the local police department in what was it? Okay, right. So they were sent to the Sarasota Police Department. I'm sending you the pictures now so that you can see them and the people at home can see them. I argue, as photographs go of Bigfoot, while I don't believe these are real, they're about as good as you're going to get.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I think that's about as good as you're going to get as far as like a clear photo of an alleged Bigfoot.
It's evil Harry and the Hendersons.
But here's the amazing thing. There was this letter that came to the Sarasota Police Department with this these photographs, And I'm going to read it to you now,
Mhm.
because I think it's just wonderful.
Please do.
Dear
This already sounds hilarious.
Dear Sir or Madam, enclosed, please find some pictures I took in late September or early October of 2000. My husband says he thinks it is an orangutan. Is someone missing an orangutan? It is hard to judge from the photos just how big this orangutan really is. It is in a crouching position in the middle of standing up from where it was sitting. It froze as soon as the flash went off. I didn't even see it as I took the first picture because it was so dark. As soon as the flash went off for the second time, it stood up and started to move. I then heard the orangutan walk off into the brushes. From where I was standing, I judge it at being about 6.5 to 7 foot tall in a kneeling position. As soon as I realised how close it was, I got back to the house. It had an awful smell that lasted well after it had left my yard. The orangutan was making deep whoomp noises. It sounded much farther away than it turned out to be. If I had known it was as close to the hedgerow as it was, I wouldn't have walked up as close as it did. I'm a senior citizen, and if this animal had come out of the hedgerow after me, there wasn't a thing I could have done about it. I was about 10 foot away from it when it stood up. I'm concerned because my grandchildren like to come down and explore in my backyard. An animal as big as this could hurt someone seriously. For 2 nights prior, it had been taking apples that my daughter had brought down from up north off our back porch.
What the fuck?
These pictures were taken on the 3rd night it had raided my apples. It only came back one more night after that and had took some apples that my husband had left out in order to get a better look at it. We left out 4 apples. I cut 2 of them in half. The orangutan only took the whole apples. We didn't see it take them. We waited up, but eventually we had to go for bed. We got a dog back there now, and as far as we can tell, the orangutan hasn't been back. Please find out where this animal came from and who it belongs to. It shouldn't be loose like this. Someone will get hurt. I called a friend that used to work with animal control back up north, and he told us to call the police. I don't want any fuss or people with guns traipsing around behind our house. We live near 175, and I'm afraid this orangutan could cause a serious accident if someone hit it. I once hit a deer that wasn't even a quarter of the size of this animal, and it totaled my car. At the very least, this animal belongs in a place like Busch Gardens where it can be looked after properly. Why haven't people been told that an animal this size is on the loose? How are people to know how dangerous it could be? If I had known an animal like this was on the loose, I wouldn't have approached it. I saw on the news that monkeys that get loose can carry hepatitis and are very dangerous. Please look after this situation. I don't want my backyard to turn into someone else's circus. God bless. I prefer to remain anonymous.
Wow. Holy shit, where to start with that?
It almost makes me think it's real.
Well, I mean, like what we were saying earlier about people like not actually lying but actually believing what they say. Obviously, this person believed that whatever this thing was stealing apples and belonged to someone.
Like
What?
the way I heard it described in a video by Bob Gilman about it was he said, "Listen, this is either a hoax or it's too bad to be a hoax." But
Yeah.
my thought was, because they say that she's a senior citizen, my thought was if there's any sort of human being who would walk up to a giant 7-foot tall ape and start taking photographs of it, then wait for photographs to be processed and then send them in a letter to the police asking them to do something or call animal control. It's a stupid old woman.
Well, you know what? I was gonna say that. I hope I don't offend anybody, but that sounds exactly so. That is exactly what I would expect an elderly woman in Florida to say about something like that.
Yeah, I know.
Wow.
Right?
Jesus.
And like so.
It's smiling in this picture.
It is smiling.
Yeah, it's
which
kind of
is
cute.
why some people think that it might be real because smiles in great apes like chimpanzees are normally a show of fear.
Uh-huh.
So in theory, like if this was a real animal and someone has taken a photograph of it and the bright light scares it, the teeth will come out like it's smiling because that's what
Oh, I mean,
gorillas tend to
it's
do.
really,
Or
it's really
orangutans.
blurry. It's hard to make out anything.
Yeah.
This could be an orangutan that just we can't make out the shape of it very well, but it absolutely could be.
It'd be a very
Kind of
odd
looks like it
coloured
might be.
orangutan.
Yeah.
I like there are a few key points in the letter that make me think it's not real.
Mm-hmm.
The so the first one that gets me is that from what I understand, the Florida skunk ape is a big enough bit of folklore that someone could have decided to make a hoax about it in the first place. I find it a little bit the idea that she would send this in and not say this is a skunk ape when she explicitly mentions the bad smell. And in my opinion, it is very clearly not an orangutan. But there was.
I guess when I said orangutan, I don't really mean orangutan. It looks like a gorilla.
No, it doesn't.
Oh, really? Well, maybe I just don't know what gorillas look like.
Gorillas are actually really sleek looking. Like they're big, but they're not shaggy. Like.
Well, I mean, like you couldn't
I know
tell.
what you mean, like that it's an ape. I think you can tell it's shaggy. I think its fur is more like an orangutan because orangutan's got this big, long hair. But this one, I think I love the letter more than I love the photographs because I think the photographs are actually really good. Like whether it's real or not, it's really good. And I've heard some people say it's a man in a costume. I was like, I would love to know, for the purpose of movie making, where I could get a costume that good. So yeah. What the whole letter, I think, is like so like bafflingly bad. Like it's so stupid that it like you say, like an elderly woman in Florida.
Yeah.
It must be real, sort of thing. I can't tell if this. I cannot tell if I think that this is an outstanding piece of comedy, or if, like you say, this is a real old woman who definitely thought she saw something and then decided to not immediately call animal control. I love that she goes to hepatitis.
Yeah, it's gonna spread hepatitis. Now, I wonder how plausible it is that this is CG in some places, or photoshopped like an actual creature with a different face or something like that.
Well, this was in 2000.
Is that confirmed, or did it just say that?
Oh no, that's confirmed. Like the police.
Oh, okay.
The police released it. It's the details are copyrighted from 2001, but yeah, they were scanned by David Bacasi from the Sarasota County Sheriff's Department, and yeah, I think this is maybe the best kind of Bigfootish thing out there. In terms of like the quality of the picture, but also the absolute banter of the letter.
Yeah. Well, I mean, considering the fact that this is confirmed from 2000, and this is just like Polaroids or whatever. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't look to me like it's a costume. Like you said, the quality of the costume would be very good. It would seem. It looks plausible enough. It's actually one of the better like pictures like that I've seen of something like this.
Yeah, because it's not 25 foot away and half hidden in fucking
yeah.
trees
It's something that's right there. But I mean, like you see when people take pictures of their dogs, they look all weird and shit. I mean, this is probably just some regular old creature that just looks weird because of the flash or something.
Yeah, it's the point that makes it difficult for me is because its face is just partly obscured by the brushes, is that it makes it difficult for me to work out whether or not its facial expression changes, or if it's the lighting and the leaves being obscured between the two photographs that make it look like its expression has changed, or whether it's actually changed.
Yeah.
I see you've... Sorry, carry on.
No, I was just going to say that let's also not forget that there was such a thing as photographic fakery back in 2000 as well. They just didn't have Photoshop. So this could also be I'm seeing some pretty substantial image quality differences between the foreground and the background, and like the face is kind of more higher quality in the foreground, and the back part of him is a little bit less I don't know. I'm starting to see some things in this that make me think that maybe it was a fake still. Maybe I can close this out by offering the following. When you said earlier that you pointed to the lack of like clear HD video footage that we should have more of now that everybody has cameras in their pockets and all that. I'm actually really surprised that there aren't more fakes. And I think that probably has something to do with the fact that
technology is making it harder to fake.
Well, more that and the fact that people kind of know what fake stuff looks like. Like people know what a deep fake is, and people know how it's done. And as I'm thinking about this, actually in the late 2000s, 2007, 2008, 2009. There actually were quite a few like motion tracking. People didn't really know how motion tracking worked and all that. So there actually were quite a few more fakes. But I think that now that it's becoming more ubiquitous how that works, that we're seeing less of that.
And also to be fair, I think with special effects being as good as they are today, it gets harder to accept something like that as true. Like I saw something from a gore website. You know when your friend thinks that they're funny and they send you a link and you're like, okay, let's see what this is. Oh no.
Yeah, yep.
And what I saw was essentially it was a cartel murder. I won't beat around the bush. It was a cartel murder. And okay. I click on it and it's like mid mutilation basically. And I remember my brain, I just going, it's really weird that this isn't too bad. It's really weird that gore in movies is so accurate. Because some people are like, oh, like a real thing doesn't look like this sort of thing. But when you see so many films, you start to see like, and the thing is like, to me, and this was real, I looked at it and I was like, is it real? I'm not sure if it's real. Yeah. And I was like, it was real. And another time of that was when I watched Apocalypse Now, where famously a real life cow actually gets cut in half. But I was so used to special effects from normal movies, it wasn't until literally the next day when I suddenly sat bolt upright and went, they didn't have the technology in the 1970s to cut a cow in half via special effects. I think that cow was actually cut in half. And then I looked it up and it was. Yeah. So like now I almost sort of wonder if we did find a real good bit of video evidence, like me and you go out there and we find Bigfoot and we film it, everyone is gonna think we faked it. Everyone is gonna think
absolutely.
That we got a visual effects artist
in.
So I've got some sympathy,
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right, and that's kind of the part of the problem with this sort of skepticism too. Is that there was a website called whywon'tgodhealamputees.com that I used to be on frequently back in the early 2000s and mid 2000s, and he said the point of the thing was that you always hear about diseases being cured or something like, or ailments being cured that might have gotten better anyway, but why don't we ever see anybody like pray and then somebody's limb gets regrown? And I asked the question, well, what if somebody did pray and then you saw somebody's limb regrow? Would you instantly believe in God, or would you look for a naturalistic explanation for that? There are lizards that can regrow things. Maybe the person had some kind of strange biological thing that allowed
Freak
that to
thing
happen,
that we
and it was
don't
just
know
a coincidence.
about, yeah.
Like, yeah, you can always posit a naturalistic explanation for something, and you would never stop there. A skeptic would never stop and say, okay, that's a miracle. They would always say, well, no, it's more likely that this some naturalistic phenomenon that we don't understand yet was the cause of it, because it's a point of view. It's not the best demonstrated. It's just it's a way of thinking. And people get that confused with well, that's just, I don't know, that just seems so stupid to me. Like,
Well, as we
why
go
won't God...
through this, I think as we go through this series and we start, talking about more and more things, because obviously, as the listeners probably realizing right now, I'm probably more of a skeptic than you are on this. But like, I think people think of a skeptic as someone who comes in and goes, "Your beliefs are stupid," and some people indeed do behave like that, and they shouldn't. I think the purpose of a skeptic really should be to play devil's advocate.
Yes.
And because it's often, and that's not to say that skepticism is the devil, but the thing is like, well, yeah, I tend to believe that skeptics tend to be the correct ones, but like the whole point is to be like, well, it might not have been this. It's quite likely it's been this.
Yeah.
And as
sort
we
of
go
the
through
Jiminy
series,
Cricket of...
absolutely. And as we go through more of this, as episodes go on, I think we'll see maybe that come to the front a little bit more.
Yeah, the sort of Mulder and Scully thing, and I like that, because I definitely am more of a... As I said earlier in a conversation we had, I'm open to believing things based on faith and divine revelation, and people who are skeptics aren't. But I really appreciate that description of skepticism, because I think that's terribly important, especially in this culture, when we have people who would not say, they're open to believing things based on faith and divine revelation and accept things based on divine revelation by choice. We have people who would say that this shit needs to be taught in schools, and that it has to be the cultural center of, we need to return to like Christian values or whatever. And when that happens, we absolutely need people who will step in and check it. So that I really appreciate that.
Well, that was episode 1 of This Spooky Dance. We talked about Bigfoot, we talked about the Yeti, and we talked about the skunk ape. And that crazy, crazy old bit you probably didn't write that letter, but I love to believe.
Yeah, definitely. All right.
See you next time.
Bye.